Welcome to 2.04 Flipped Video Lesson, Rome Revived. This goes along with your student guide pages 41 to 46. We will actually start on student guide page 42 and then move back to page 41 at the end of our lesson. Lesson Introduction, Rome Revived. By the late Middle Ages, Rome, once the heart of classical civilization and center of the Christian church, had fallen into ruins. Ancient temples housed filthy markets. People had taken stones from the Colosseum to build their own homes. When the papacy returned to Rome after years of exile in France in 1417, the Pope was dismayed at what he saw. Could the popes use their wealth and power in Rome the way the Medici family had in Florence? Churches, statues, paintings, gardens, libraries, aqueducts. Rome would be Rome again, and Italy's greatest artists would be called upon to make it happen. Lesson objectives. When you finish this lesson, you should be able to describe Rome in the early 1400s and explain the reasons for its condition, analyze art to gain understanding of Renaissance thinking, describe the role of the popes as patrons of art and literature and restorers of the city of Rome and how they financed the work, give examples of the achievements and weaknesses of the Renaissance popes, identify Michelangelo as the great Florentine sculptor and painter whose work includes the Pietà, David, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, and the dome of St. Peter's Basilica. Identify Raphael as the Renaissance painter known for paintings of Madonnas and frescoes. Recognize Rome's historical significance to the Christian Church. Rome in the early 1400s. The walls of the Colosseum were crumbling. The once magnificent stadium housed scores of filthy taverns. Thieves lurked in the ancient baths. On Capitoline Hill, the old center of Roman government, vines grew over the benches of senators. One humanist lamented that the Roman Forum, once the heart of an empire, had turned into a neglected desert, here the home of pigs and wild deer, and there a vegetable garden. The popes restore Rome. Rome was the historic center of the Christian church. During the 14th century, French kings had forced popes to live in the town of Avignon. By the early 15th century, Rome once again became the official home of the Pope, who faced the enormous task of restoring the fallen city. Money source. All over Europe, kings, princes, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the ordinary folk gave money to the church as a sign of their faith. Much of that money flowed to the Pope in Rome. Revival of classical learning. Many Renaissance popes organized teams to find ancient statues. They collected coins, books, and other relics of the ancient past. They transformed the Vatican into a vast palace complex to display some of Europe's finest treasures. And a new papal library housed a growing collection of Latin and Greek texts. The Vatican welcomed poets, philosophers, and scholars. Pope Sixtus IV. Renaissance popes were often more concerned with politics, power, and luxury than spiritual leadership. Excesses. Pope Sixtus IV spent some of the church's gold on his relatives and gave 5 of his nephews powerful positions in the church. He fought a war against Florence and plotted against Lorenzo de' Medici. He often hosted rich banquets where guests dined on roasted boar and plundered small castles made of sweets. His achievements. Sixtus IV built new roads, repaired aqueducts, and restored the city's walls. He sought out ancient Greek, Latin, and Hebrew writings, and added more than 1,000 volumes to the Vatican Library. He built a new chapel in the Vatican called the Sistine Chapel. He hired the best artists in Italy to paint scenes from the lives of Moses and Christ on its walls. Pope Julius II. Background and characteristics. Julius was the nephew of Sixtus IV. He became pope in 1503 after bribing church officials to elect him to the office. He was 60 years old when he was elected pope. He was impulsive and strong-willed and had a temper. He was known as the terrifying pope. Excesses. His appetite required expensive foods. He built himself 3 palaces. When he went to war, he not only included his knights and soldiers, but also included high officials in the church and the choir from the Sistine Chapel. Achievements. He ordered workers to pave streets, replace ancient sewers, and dredged the Tiber River so ships could come and go easily. He attracted scholars to the city. He collected books and purchased classical art. He hired the best painters, sculptors, and architects in Italy. He demolished the ancient basilica and erected a huge new St. Peter's. Michelangelo. The stormy relationship between Michelangelo and his patron, Julius II, led to some of the finest art the world has known. Background: the early years. Michelangelo was born in a mountain village east of Florence. His caretaker was the wife of a stonecutter, so he grew up around an artisan. Around the age of 10, he entered school in Florence, but he was more interested in studying art. He convinced his father to let him become an apprentice in an artist's studio, where he learned to paint in fresco. His stay with Lorenzo de' Medici. At the Medici Palace, Michelangelo was exposed to poets, philosophers, and artists. He learned to admire human abilities and the classical past. He learned to write poetry. He loved sculpting in marble, and he tried to depict the human form in stone. He made secret visits to a nearby hospital where he cut open corpses to study the positions of muscles and veins. In Rome. In 1496, Michelangelo, aged 21, traveled to Rome for the first time. He was commissioned by a French cardinal to carve a marble statue of the Virgin Mary holding the dead Christ in her arms, a Pietà. It took him more than a year to finish the Pietà. Return to Florence. He convinced the city's leaders to give him a chance to turn a huge block of marble sitting near the city's cathedral into a symbol of Florence's greatness. He sculpted a 14-foot tall statue of the biblical David about to do battle with Goliath. Florentines greatly admired the statue and put it in a public square. The Sistine Chapel. Julius II wanted Michelangelo to cover the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel with frescoes. Michelangelo reluctantly agreed to paint the chapel ceiling. The work took 4 years. He designed a scaffold that allowed him to paint some 60 feet above the floor. He painted nearly 350 magnificent human figures that looked as though they had been sculpted into the ceiling. The tomb of Pope Julius. Julius II commissioned Michelangelo to carve a grand tomb for him. Michelangelo sketched a design for a colossal monument that would include 40 life-size statues. He only managed to carve 3. St. Peter's Basilica. When Michelangelo was 71 years old, Pope Paul III appointed him architect of St. Peter's. Michelangelo devoted the last 17 years of his life to the building. He designed a lofty dome to crown the church. He lived to see the framework of his dome rise against the sky, but he died before it was finished. Raphael Sanzio. Raphael and his paintings were so popular that he was called the Prince of Painters. Background and characteristics. Raphael was born in the city-state of Urbino, and he grew up learning to draw and paint. His father was an artist. When Raphael was about 20 years old, he moved to Florence to study the works of Masaccio and Leonardo da Vinci. The works of Raphael. Raphael's most popular works were his paintings of Mary and the infant Jesus, known as Madonnas. His Madonnas feature gentle faces, soft lines, and delicate colors. His style displays his love of the classical ideal of order. He was commissioned by Julius II to decorate the walls of the Pope's private rooms in the Vatican. He painted the School of Athens in the Pope's library. He spent the last 12 years of his life in Rome before he died at the age of 37. He left behind scores of portraits, Madonnas, and frescoes. This is a guide to page 41. There are questions which go with the Analyzing the Art, the School of Athens. You can go ahead and pause the video, take a look at the questions, and use these answers to compare against yours. This goes along with your student guide, page 46, the Sistine Chapel. Again, take a look at the Sistine Chapel and pictures in your Human Odyssey book. Look at the questions, fill in your answers, and you can compare them with the answers here on the screen. Questions 6 through 10 are opinion questions, so there are no specific answers given on this page. And we come to the end. Just some famous quotes by Michelangelo. Genius is eternal patience. Faith in one's self is the best and safest course. A man paints with his brains and not with his hands. Every block of stone has a statue inside it, and it is the task of the sculptor to discover it. Thanks for joining me today.